Welcome to Earth, a Love Story. I'm your host, Robin Lassiter. On this episode, I begin a new series where I break down and make sense of the wild journey I've been on and the wild things I've been told by the Four Who Are One and others. And through this new series, we'll develop some shorthand, lots of which you already may know if you've been listening for a while. Shorthand like turn towards, touching bottom, the overculture, first fuck you, not you, but yeah. Evolution through suffering, evolution through joy, the Bridge Collective, bloodless revolution through joy, and more. It's time for a change. I am being influenced to change. Influence, which is another bit of shorthand we'll become intimately familiar with. This episode is about the final death of the small self and what it took to get there, and how I resisted, which is my special skill, until it became clear that the only way out was through. The only option left for me was to surrender, to consent, to say yes. And who was I saying yes to? The earth herself, certainly. My higher self, maybe. The Four Who Are One. Some unseen hand, some unseen pressure, some evolutionary program on this planet that invites us and pushes us and coerces us and influences us to change and morph and grow. And the other big question besides who is why. Why are we brought to these points of no return where the only option is to take a wild leap of faith across some event horizon where we don't know what will happen on the other side? That's a big question. And I have my answer. This surrender is in response to suffering, to my own suffering and the suffering in the world. The brokenness that we can see around us as children are slaughtered and people are moved around like chess pieces by psychopathic men in power who are themselves most certainly being influenced. And on much more subtle levels, how the suffering is woven through everything so that even when things are easy, they're hard. The too hot, too cold, transitory existence here. We look around and see the nature of this place, that suffering exists, and we feel in us a call to do something about it. A desire for everyone, literally everyone, to be free from that. And the task is enormous and overwhelming, and we decide that even if it takes infinite lifetimes, that's why we're here. And we don't even know what it means or how we'll do it, but what we do know is there's nowhere else to go. There's nothing else to do. We are here, we are here, we are here. And spoiler, when we step across that threshold, even though it may take some time, we start to notice that there is not only suffering in the world, but also unspeakable beauty. We see our radical responsibility for all of it, that we actually have the power to remake the world. And then we surrender to that, too. And one note of importance before we continue, and I cannot state this strongly enough. This journey requires a tremendous amount of discernment. We should not surrender to every form of influence, from either our corporeal world or the unseen world. Look around. Look around at everything that is fighting for our attention. Part of this journey is reclaiming our sovereignty and agency and clawing back our autonomy and self-worth in the face of continual influence. Word to the wise. Get clear about your shadows. Get clear about what the best version of you actually wants. Your mission, your North Star, and align your surrender with that. Okay. For me, this journey towards the final death of the small self started way back when I was coerced, influenced, to write the book. And in surrendering to that, I learned that the Four Who Are One were fucking right. That writing the book did bridge the gap between two big blocks of my life. I went from a very burned out medical practice manager who was holding on by her fingernails and white-knuckling every day to an author, podcaster, off-grid dome dweller, and joyful experiencer of other worlds and the people and beings who frequent them. And this has only been possible because after much kicking and screaming and whining and carrying on, I turned toward the thing that was calling. I surrendered. So surrender can also be called the turn towards it tool. I'd learned this trick years and years ago when I found myself in unsafe or unfulfilling or sick-making experiences and relationships of all kinds. I learned that whenever I found myself stuck and suffering, I could progress the narrative if I pivoted and turned towards something new, if I unstuck myself and took a leap. And it wasn't always a great leap. I still had so much shadow and unconscious programming, and I still do. I still have shadow, of course. But at that time, it was really running the show. And so I often leapt from one shit reality to another shit reality. But my unskillful ass did progress the story. And that was valuable. You guys know how it is. This stuff, this evolution of self, unfolds not in straight lines, but in spirals. That pivoting and leaping is in the same groove of the spiral as the final death of the small self. It was a messy training ground. No shame, no blame. It's just what it was and where I was at the time. Find myself in a studio apartment in Seattle in unrequited love with my roommate, drinking too much and suffering and struggling. Call up my ex-boyfriend to drive up and get me and start something old, new with him. In a hellscape of boredom and overwhelm with my 2-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-acre double wide and a boyfriend to cook and clean for every day while I worked a full-time job. Jump off of a cliff and call the whole thing off, even though I just moved heaven and earth to buy that place 8 months ago. College, soul-sucking and horrible? Join a commune. It's fun. Sometimes we need to collapse the narrative. Sometimes that's all that can be done when we need to progress the story. It was in Robin Davidson's book, Tracks, where I first heard Renata Adler's quote, "I think when you're truly stuck, when you have stood still in the same spot for too long, you throw a grenade in exactly the spot you're standing in, and jump, and pray. It is the momentum of last resort." And that was my jam for a long time. There was a lot of jumping and praying, and amazingly, a lot of grace. A lot of being caught and held, and that felt like magic. It was during this time that I realized that I am a cliff jumper. A leap and the net will appear. My nervous system was pretty shot, granted, and also it was totally thrilling, like discovering a magical cheat code for life. And it worked to progress the story for a really long time. Until it didn't. Because even that story needed to progress at some point. That paradigm needed to change. The part of it that was rooted in a trauma response needed to evolve. And I don't want to retell my whole life story. If you want to hear it, you can listen to me read my book in the first 15 episodes of this podcast. So let's skip ahead. Skip ahead to the post-therapy, post-EMDR, several years sober me. A me that's trying to gather the strength and courage to stay instead of leap. A me at the end of my 25th or so move that has grown so very weary of moving. A me that's starting to admit to herself that she wants love, and a me that desperately wants to believe it is possible for things to work out sometimes. So, I got into a relationship, and I put all of those eggs in that basket. The longing for love, desperate to have something work out, faith having, exhausted from moving eggs. And that worked for a while, until it didn't. Are you catching the theme? That relationship ended, and it was the death of such a big and heavy timeline that I'd poured so much of myself into that for the first time in my life, even through all of the years of chaos and numbing and running and trauma and drama, I was faced with real grief. The arrival of the emotional body is a broad theme and energy that's coming through our bodies from the planet over the last few years, and something that many of us are grappling with. We're going to talk about that a lot too in upcoming episodes, by the way. My emotional body arrived with me desperately clinging to a dying relationship, watching the idea that it was possible for things to work out sometimes crumble, watching in helplessness with a total sense of futility. I was being faced with a giant fucking no, and there was nothing I could do about it. My body and nervous system were like prey, scared rabbits scrambling for safety, and there was none to be found. And because of that, I finally did something I'd never done. I used the turn towards it tool not to burn down my life and start over, but instead to turn down and in. And it was the turning down and in that led me eventually to the final death of the small self. I did the harder thing, the thing I had never done, and turned towards the call of my own dark belly. This is when I found the Sumerian goddess Inanna, Her story, 2,000 years older than the Bible, was found written in cuneiform and recorded on thousands of scattered clay tablets. It was translated and retold and brought to the world in the last century, just when we need her most, just in the nick of time. And reading the translation by Diane Wolkstein and Samuel Noah Kramer, I can still remember the feeling in my body when I came across the first stanza of The Descent of Inanna. From the great above, she opened her ear to the great below. From the great above, the goddess opened her ear to the great below. From the great above, Inanna opened her ear to the great below. I went down and in. I surrendered to the grief. I surrendered to the call of the underworld. I surrendered to my own repressed grief and rage and pain. And spoiler for those of you doing this work, when I got down there, I found not only the emotions from the current relationship and situation waiting for me, I found that my dark sister, the great round, the uncried cry, was down there holding it all. I felt like if I cracked the door and felt even a shimmer of the enormity of that pain and grief, I'd never get off the floor. I felt like the carefully constructed world I'd created would fall apart. I felt like everything would change and I would be carried away. And I secretly hoped that I would. I wanted to fall down and let it all fall apart. I wanted to let it take me. I wanted to lay down and never get up, and I did, and it did, and I stayed down for a long time. And it came through in layers. First, it was me letting go of this relationship that I thought would save me from the gaping maw of death and endings and loss. I did it slowly, as safely as possible, and it was excruciating, but I made it through. But part of the reason that I made it through was because I immediately shifted my focus to another external thing that might save me. At the same time that all of this was going on, I was working with a cohort of women, and I'd also discovered the experiencer group. There was this electric new possibility in my life. A possibility that if the relationship couldn't save me, my connection to this other new special world would. I was half a degree away from notable and respected people that seemed to be interested in what I had to say. Maybe my book would get me famous. Maybe I would be seen and recognized and validated, and then that would make sense of my life. Another external savior. I replaced the relationship with this idea of the specialness of being an experiencer, and I started to pile all of the unrealistic expectations onto that. I didn't even know how it would save me. I just clung to the idea that it would. Okay, so all of that is the fucking intro to this episode. That's a setup. I had touched grief. I'd gone down and met Ereshkigal, my dark sister, and I was on the floor underneath the wave, and also seeing this other timeline emerging and desperately hoping that would rescue me from my life. So as part of that, I started to pin all of my hopes on this very special sounding conference that was coming up where all of the big muckety muck dudes in the ufology world would be speaking and presenting and gathering. And I had really grown to respect these muckety muck dudes. Many of my new friends would also be there from the experiencer world, and who knows, like secretly, this is what I thought, maybe I would fall in love and get double rescued all in one fell swoop. This was the first Archives of the Impossible conference at Rice University in Houston, put on by Dean of Humanities, Dr. Jeffrey Kripal, in 2022, the first conference. And I was gonna go. And I don't know if I've talked about this, but until recently, I've had a really, really big fear of flying. And I also have a massive love of road trips. So I was gonna drive down in my truck, camping along the way or staying with friends or whatever. And it's a long fucking way from Southern Colorado to Houston, and I really couldn't wait. It was just going to be the thing to save me, and I ran towards that shit. Okay, so up until now, I've written out this episode. I've kind of laid out these ideas so that I can make sense of it. For this part of the telling, though, I'm going to speak it without any script. I'm just going to let it come through. I really want to tell you the story of the final death of the small self in real time and with presence. And I'm not going to hold back, even the stuff I'm embarrassed about. I'm going to tell you all the things. Fuck around. So this was in March of 2022. February 24th of 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. And I don't know how you felt at that time, but for me, it was like World War III is fucking possible and kind of on our doorstep. And it was horrific. It was kind of like October 7th of 2023, watching this horrific thing unfold on the planet and feeling it all and feeling helpless and knowing that people and children were suffering. And it was just such a heightened time. And so as I was driving down to Houston, that was very present. That was happening. I was having a trauma response while I was packing for this trip, just full-blown fight or flight. Felt really good to be packing up to drive away, just having that movement to get the fuck out of here, get the fuck out of anywhere, running towards this potential rescue that would save me from all the things. And as I was packing for the trip, I was pulling tarot cards from multiple decks like a maniac. And I know better than to pull multiple cards for the same question. Because my decks very often will be like, I said what I fucking said. And that's what happened with this. So I pulled first the death card, got it, transformation, but like also, death. The next card I pulled was the 10 of Swords. And if you work with the tarot at all, you're like, ooh, yeah, that's not great. Pretty rough. And then I pulled the Strength card. And I was like, all right, cool. I'm going to pull one more card from this other deck and just maybe see maybe it's like a happy, fun card. Where's my 2 of Cups card or my 10 of Cups card here? So I pulled one more card and it was the Death card again. So that was fun and funny. Got the Death card twice, 10 of Swords and Strength. And I really should have seen the signs. I really should have seen the writing on the wall. Got in my truck, started driving south, and I thought, well, Roswell, New Mexico is kind of on the way. Never been there. I'm headed to a UFO conference. Let's go to Roswell. I arrived in Roswell, which is kind of like the town that I grew up in, just this sort of small town in the middle of nowhere, except it's covered in little green men, which I've always wondered about. Like, why has anyone ever reported a little green man as part of a abduction or experience? If you've seen little green men, reach out to me. I don't even think that's a thing, but that's how the culture has brought it into the world, and Roswell is full of it. And I loved it. It was great. It was kitschy and silly, and underneath it, there's a thing underneath the thing, So I walked up and down the streets of Roswell, and I bought some merch and some stickers, and I brought a sweatshirt that says Roswell that I still wear to this day and I love. And I didn't know what to do. I hadn't really planned about where I was going to sleep, but I thought, I still feel like I have some energy. I'll get on the road. So I got on the highway, driving out of Roswell, realized I need gas because I'm dumb. And I turn around, go back into town. And then navigation is still set. I think I was heading towards maybe like Odessa, Texas. And same navigation, and it just takes me a completely different way. And as I'm driving out of Roswell, the sun has set. There's still a little bit of light in the sky. And in front of me, I see, of course, a fucking UFO, right? It's just sitting there. And then as I'm driving more and more, it's kind of following me. And I'm just like, Jesus fucking Christ. All right, here we go. And I notice that my navigation has taken me a completely different way. So instead of driving down like the main highway at 70 miles an hour or whatever, I was on this kind of back road through these tiny little towns that kept making right angle turns. And it was like a 35 to 40 mile an hour road. And it was pitch black. There were no lights anywhere. It was the middle of damn nowhere. And the only thing that I could see was every now and then these huge spurts of flames coming up from the oil derricks that must have been out there in the dark. And it was so surreal and bizarre. So I'm driving like this kind of back and forth, right angle, take a right, take a left, take a right, take a left. And it's pitch dark and there's just flames erupting around me. And I was, trauma response heightened anyway. And this was just like, what the actual fuck is happening? So drive, takes a really long time. I finally get to a town, which I think was Odessa. I'd have to look at a map, and find a hotel. Get into the hotel room. It was very late, and I opened my laptop, and a friend of mine from Australia had sent me a PDF about ley lines. And I was like, okay, come on. Like, I don't want to be I'm not really into this. I don't really want to do this. But of course I opened it, looked at it. The first thing I see is that the route that I have taken and that I am going to continue to take on my way to Houston is right along a ley line. I'm like, no, thank you. Shut the fuck up. I don't want anything to do with this. This is the new age shit that I want to reject, and I'm not doing it. So closed it up, went to sleep, woke up at about 3 a.m. into a full-blown panic attack that I couldn't account for. But that makes sense, like prosaic explanation. My life was falling apart. I was going down to be rescued. I had a weird night driving through some bizarre hellscape. Like, makes sense, right? So I woke up into a full panic attack. And in the middle of the panic attack, I actually felt myself get sick. I felt this illness take me. I used all the tools that I have to deal with panic attacks. I eventually went back to sleep, woke up really early in the morning, and I was still in communication with Jupiter, who's the guy that I was breaking up with. And I texted him and said, this trip is already really hard and it's weird and I'm having a panic attack. And I packed up my stuff, went out to the car, and he messaged me just as I was putting my stuff into my truck to get going. And I looked at the message, and he had sent me a picture of a bee and said, don't worry, you're safe and you're being guided. And this is not something that Jupiter would say. Like, he was not really into this stuff. He kind of thought it was cool that I was, but it wasn't really his thing. And so to get that message from him, like, don't worry, you're being guided, and sent me a bee, which is one of my guides. I was like, okay. And as I'm getting into the truck, this bee flies over and lands on my shoulder. I'm not even kidding you. And I was like, okay, all right, motherfuck. Okay. Surrender. Like, not even really though, just kind of edges. Like, I guess I'll keep going. I guess I'll do the thing. So I felt a little better. I felt like, okay, maybe I can get through this. Here's my bee guide. So got in the truck. As I'm getting in the truck, the bee's like continuing. It's like landing on my window. It won't go away. I finally open my window. It comes in. We like hang out for a while, and then finally it goes on its way. So I get on the road, and I'm listening to random podcasts or whatever. I don't know how this comes up, but this podcast comes up where Dolores Cannon is talking. I think it was a YouTube video maybe. And I'm listening to it, and I'm like, yeah, okay. Yeah, waves of volunteers coming to the planet. None of it really fits, but there's resonance. I kind of get it. And then at the end of this podcast, I will try to find it and put it in the show notes. She starts talking about this new group that has started coming up in her hypno sessions that she's calling the 10,000, or the grid keepers, or the keepers of the grid. And there are these 10,000 volunteers that work with ley lines on the planet. And I was just like, shut the motherfuck up. Like, shut up. I don't want to believe any of this. I don't want this to be true. I know that I'm driving along a ley line to get to Houston, and I know that book got sent to me last night. This is a synchronicity I want to ignore. I'm not interested in doing that. It's just so cringy. You know what I mean? It's just such fucking cringe. I didn't want to do it. But the synchronicities just would not stop around that stuff. It just kept going and going and going as I'm driving. And at some point, very angrily, I decide to maybe follow the signs. Like, okay. It was again, these like little moments of surrender. Like, all right, okay, maybe I'm this person and this is what I'm supposed to do. And I'll follow, and maybe I'm supposed to like buy a crystal and bury it somewhere, and fucking fine, I'll do that. So I'm driving along, I'm pissed, I'm resisting. I'm eating like shit, by the way. I'm stopping at like fast food places and drinking a lot of coffee, and I really feel sick. Like I'm I'm not feeling too like sick from whatever sickness arrived in the night, but I'm feeling like my body is just feeling really gross from all the crap that I'm putting into it. And I'm just the whole time in just one big trauma response. So that night I make it to Austin, and I have a friend who has a place in Austin, and he was actually going to be at the archives of the Impossible Conference. I'm going to get him on the podcast at some point because he's a very amazing, cool, fantastic person. But anyway, he let me stay in his place in Austin. And so I got in. It's very safe, very lovely, very quiet. Got into bed to go to sleep and instantly taken into these realer than real dream experiences of being in Ukraine with this guy whose apartment I'm in, and with my friend David Coleman, who is a profoundly gifted astrologer and hermetic magician. And so in this very real, not, dream, but more than a dream state, the three of us were moving through kind of the war-torn streets in Ukraine, helping people get away, directing people, helping people who are suffering. And I know that I'm not the only one who's had this experience. Like, I know that you guys out there, many of you have. It was like working all night, and it was very heavy, and I was very grateful that I could at least be doing something. So I woke up very early the next morning, and I was sick, and I felt it, and I was like, fuck. So this was still, 2022, early 2022, COVID, definitely a thing. And so I went to a pharmacy, and I put on a mask, and I went in and I bought a thermometer. And I came out and took my temperature, and sure enough, I had a fever, and I was not feeling well. And I was, in fucking Austin, and Houston's right there. And I was sharing a hotel room with somebody in Houston, and this person had a little bit of a compromised immune system. And I'm just watching this morning play out and watching my temperature go up and up and up. And I was like, Jesus fucking Christ, I'm not going to be able to go to this conference. And I couldn't. But I was like, I'm all the way down here. I'm at least going to go see the ocean. I'm just going to drive to Houston. Who knows? Something may happen. Maybe I'll feel better. Maybe it'll just go away. I'm just going to keep driving. Okay. So I'm also really suddenly grieving the fact that this external savior that I thought was going to save me, and I was going to meet all these amazing people, and like maybe I would be discovered and people would think I was special and cool. Like none of that was going to happen. This thing that I had set up to be the thing that was going to save me was not going to happen. And I was sad, and I was also pissed. Like I was really, really angry, and I was feeling very sorry for myself. And I was confused, and very confused about the ley line stuff. And I told some of my friends about it, and they were so affirming that also pissed me off. They were like, "Oh yeah, no, I've suspected that about you." I'm just like, "What? Shut the fuck up. No, you haven't. I'm normal. Stop. Like, I don't want to be this person." Can you hear it? Can you hear me? Losing my mind. So, drove down to Houston. I don't know if you can hear that. I don't know if the microphone picked that up. If it did pick that up, that was my moon app telling me that the moon has moved into Virgo. So that's perfect for recording this episode. That's hilarious. I was like, I'm going to just drive to the ocean because it's right there. I'm going to go see the Gulf of Mexico. And so I texted Jupiter again, and I said, I'm sick. I'm pretty sure I have COVID. I didn't test yet, because I was just newly sick and I didn't think it would show. And either way, it didn't matter. Like whether I had COVID or not, I was not going to go to the conference and potentially get everybody sick. So I texted my ex-partner Jupiter, and I said, this is what's happened. I'm so sad, and I don't know what to do. And in response, he just sent me coordinates, like a pin from Google Maps, And I was like, what the fuck is happening? It's very weird. This is not his thing, like guiding me to this place. It was very strange. I was like, well, I've come this far. May as well keep going. in terms of like another little moment of surrender, like, okay. And the point that he took me to was like the Antipodes, this tiny little point of land that reached out into the Gulf of Mexico farther than anything else around it. And I think it was like a state park or something, so that I could, maybe camp there and spend the night, whatever. So I followed it, drove through Galveston. It was really beautiful. I was like, oh, it's a cool place. Drove, got to this beach. And, again, like pissed, suffering, didn't feel good, feeling sorry for myself, feeling really rebellious towards the guidance, and basically told the 4 who are 1 as I'm getting out of the truck. And I brought all my spiritual paraphernalia, so I had like, this is the embarrassing part, but it's true. And it's who I am. I, brought out my bag of crystals and my sage and my incense. And I have this beautiful hand drum that I painted a bee on. Maybe I'll find a picture of it and post it somewhere for you guys to see. So I have this bee drum and, like a blanket and a basket to carry everything. And I get out of my truck and I'm the only one there. There is nobody else. There's no other vehicles. There's nothing. And I'm standing there on the beach and I'm looking to my right and I'm looking to my left and like, I don't know where to go. Now what, And I say to the 4 who are 1, if I'm supposed to be following some fucking guidance, you better show up and guide me. And just then, the word ashwagandha floats into my brain and I smell the smell of a horse, which I know so intimately because I grew up with horses. I know what a horse smells like. This was undoubtedly, beyond a shadow of a doubt, this was the smell of a horse. And later I looked it up, and I don't know if you guys know this. I didn't know this. Ashwagandha is a Sanskrit word, and it means the smell of a horse. I cannot make this shit up. I'm like, fuck, all right. So I'm like following the smell of a horse down the beach. And I kind of walk towards the water and turn left and I go around this sandbar. And so just walking down the beach, finally come to a place where it's like, okay, this is fine. I'm going to sit down here and do whatever I'm here to do as some sort of fucking grid keeper. I lay out my stuff and I sit down on the beach and I look out into the water and right in front of me are these like massive oil rig things. And it's not like a beautiful expansive view. It's like very industrial. I'm just like, what the fuck am I doing here? So I'm sitting there and I notice in front of me, like right in front of me in the water, about, 30 feet away or something. And the waves are super gentle. They're just like lapping back and forth against the shore, not big waves at all. And in that kind of lapping water back and forth is something that's like rolling back and forth in the water. And right in front of me, like right there. So I get up, I go over there, and it's a dead seagull. I promise you I'm embarrassed telling you this story, okay, you guys? It's a dead seagull. I'm like dramatically suffering. And I'm like, what is this? And I was like, okay, well, I guess the least I can do is sort of honor this dead bird and take it out of the water. It's just so sad kind of being pushed around by the waves in there. And so I got 2 sticks and I brought it kind of close to where I was sitting. And I was like, I'm just going to drum for like the suffering on this planet and for the loss of life. And then I'm going to bury it. And that's going to be my sort of act that I do down here at the ocean and, on this trip where all of my small dreams fell apart. So I'm drumming and I'm pissed and I'm crying and I'm feeling really sorry for myself. And it's very, very dramatic and there's a lot of suffering and I'm kind of surrendered actually. I'm just like, okay, I'm here. I'm doing the thing. I'm doing it earnestly, out of love for the planet, out of love for this creature, this dead bird. So this goes on for a while and I look over at this dead seagull and its eyes, which had been like dull and crusted over with sand, are like bright and clear and looking at me. I was so surprised by this. And almost instantly, I was like, motherfuck, like, now what am I going to do? This bird isn't dead, but it's not well. Like, what the fuck am I going to do? Its body was still limp. It was like resting its beak in the sand, and its beak was all covered with sand. And, it looked, other than its eye being like bright and alive, it looked dead. I was just like, Jesus Christ. So I kind of look at it out of the corner of my eye, but just kind of keep drumming and keep doing the stuff that I'm doing and really trying to, to honor that life of this bird that matters, just like all of our lives on the planet matter, and in the back of my mind, though, I was thinking, like, if this bird is mostly dead and suffering and I pulled it out of the water instead of just letting it die, I'm responsible for it now. And thinking about when I was a kid, and like sometimes we had to kill animals, we had to put things out of their misery sometimes. It's something that happens when you like live in the country. And I was thinking to myself, like, I'm going to have to kill this bird. Just fuck. And I was like, I don't think that I can handle that. I don't think I can handle killing this bird. Like, am I going to have to wring its neck? And Jesus, I was just so annoyed with myself that I'd plucked this bird out of the water and instead of just leaving it there to go on with its natural death. That's all going on in the back of my mind. And in the meantime, I'm like still drumming and still kind of earnestly doing the thing and trying to be connected. And I'm glancing over at the bird, and its beak, which had been kind of lolling to the side and resting in the sand, was now like up a 1/4 inch. And over a period of probably, 10, 15 minutes, this bird just fully comes back to life. Like, his head's up, he's looking around, he's pissed off, he's wondering what the hell, he's looking at me like he's looking at me like, why did you pull me back from that edge? Like, I was happily going. I was like, I'm so sorry. And at some point, I turned to this bird that was just still laying there. And I put my drum down. I turned towards the bird and I looked at him and I said, do you want to live? And I was kind of pissed because now I was now responsible for this bird's life. And I said, do you want to live? And at that moment, can't make this up, this bird opens its wings, launches its body forward, and splays itself out across my drum. And I was like, okay. And I looked down and I realized that it has a broken leg, and that's why it was dying. And that's why it can't fly away right now, because it can't get going, on its broken leg. So I sat there for a while, not knowing what the fuck to do. And finally I thought, well, I wonder if there's like a bird rescue or something. Like, I can't be the only one who cares about this poor seagull. So I started looking online for a vet's office or something like that. And I found one. I found this vet's office. I called them and I said, here's the situation. I'm down on the beach. There's this bird. It's very much alive, but it has a broken leg. What will you guys, can you direct me to someone? And they said, you can bring in the bird. And there are 2 choices. You can be responsible for its treatment by giving us your credit card, and we're going to do anything we can to save its life. Or you can bring it and sign a waiver that says, we're going to do everything we can to save this bird's life, but if we're not able to, we're going to put it down humanely. And the only way that we're going to tell you the outcome is if you leave us your credit card number. They're like, this is not our first rodeo. I was like, okay, that's actually sounds fair. So I take my sweater or something and like wrap it around this bird, put it in the basket that I'd brought, and it lets me do it. I think this bird felt very male to me, who knows, but he seemed very pissed, very alive, but lets me like bundle him up, put him in the basket, put him in my truck, and drive to this vet's office. And I walk into the busiest vet's office that I've ever seen in my life. And I go up to the counter and ask the woman, like, hey, I think I just talked to you about this seagull. And she's like, oh yeah. She was like, so nice, not a pain in the ass for me to do this to them. And I said, look, I don't have the money to have you guys go to any means necessary to try to fix this bird's broken leg. But I really, really would like to know what happens to him. Like, could I just call tomorrow and find out? And she said, no. When you sign this piece of paper, you're signing away your right to know what happens to this bird. I was like, okay. So I signed the piece of paper. I left the seagull in the vet's office. I got back into my truck in Galveston, Texas. It was like 5:00 in the afternoon. It was rush hour traffic. And I was so far from home. And I started the very long drive back. And on the very long drive back, I start to get, I will say that I start to wonder if I should stay on the planet, to be honest. So, trigger warning, like I really was thinking about suicide, which is the most ridiculous thing. I wouldn't have done it. I didn't like have a plan to do it, but I was very much thinking like, I don't understand my life and I don't understand what I'm supposed to do here. And the last thing I was clinging to rescue me, to save me, is now gone. Like this conference, I don't get to meet any of these friends that I've met online. I don't get to have this external rescue. I have to just go home now. And home is where everything is falling apart and is just full of grief and there's no way out. And I don't have any more moves left. So I'm like, it's an outsized reaction to what's happening, but it's real. Like I'm really, really feeling all this suffering, all this deep pain. I'm just really, really sick, getting sicker and sicker. I have like 101 degree temperature and I drive until I can't keep my eyes open. Like I drive. I'm somewhere, God knows where, in the middle of Texas. And I see a Holiday Inn Express coming up and I pull over and it's gotta be 11:00 at night. And I need to get on the road really early the next day because I want to get home in one day. And I pull up and I look at my phone and this place is like $220 a night. And it's the only option. And I'm just like, I have a truck. I camp in my truck. That's what it's for. And I just didn't want to go in and spend all that money. And I also likely had COVID and I was cognizant of that. And I didn't want to go into the hotel. So I put on my mask, went into the hotel, stood way back and asked the front desk person, I said, look, I am driving. I'm going to leave really early in the morning. I have a camper shell on the back of my truck. Can I please just park in your parking lot and sleep? I'm sick. I really just need a place to stay that's safe. And this angel of a woman was like, drive right there, park right under that street light. The cops come by and make rounds and I'll tell them to watch out and make sure that you're okay. And she said, and I can see you from here and I'll keep an eye on you. I'm the night shift. I'll be here all night. I'll keep an eye on you. And there's a bathroom over there. Go use the bathroom, brush your teeth, do whatever you need. And I'll watch you all night. And the relief for this woman helping me was just enormous. So did all of that, climbed into the back of my truck. It's probably, 11:30 midnight at this point. And I'm certain I have COVID because I'm in the worst pain that I've ever been in my life. And I have 103 degree fever and I'm shivering and sweating and every joint hurts and I'm suffering emotionally and mentally and just an extraordinary pain. And I'm tossing and turning and I can't sleep and I'm trying to listen to soothing music or read or just anything to distract me from how uncomfortable this is. But it was just so uncomfortable. And all of a sudden, my phone dings and it's my friend David, who's in Germany. And he says, I know what you're going through, because he's a magical being. He says, I know what you're going through. He said, I've been there before. This is what happens at some point along our journey. Is just like a gazelle lays down and lets the lion take it for the good of the herd, that we have to lay down and surrender for the good of all beings, and that's what you're going through. And it's like a death. And I was clinging to his words as some sort of context, some sort of framework to everything that I had been through and to this, great physical pain and suffering that I was going through. And then he sends me a message, and I'm going to play the message for you here.
Hi, here's my voice. You got my voice energy for some reason. So you needed it. You need to listen to me, damn it. I know it's tough. I've been through some pretty rough ones myself. All right. I know it's tough. Breathing helps. Breathing has helped me a lot. I'm not a practitioner in this lifetime of Kriya Yoga, but I was in my most recent lifetime before this one. And that's helped me a lot because that lifetime went through major transition as well, a lot of death. So breathing, remembering to consciously breathe, and by that I mean most of the time we're breathing unconsciously. We're not even thinking about what we're doing, and our body is taking over. So that part of our brain is in our unconscious that's doing the breathing. And conscious breathing is bringing like that activity forward into a conscious area of the brain. And breathing in, for example, peace, tranquility, ease of transition through difficult times, and so on. And you're breathing it in, imagining that as you breathe in, the idea is being sort of bonded to the air that you're breathing in, right? So you're breathing in the idea and the air with this conscious intent. And it's not just coming in through your mouth, it's coming in through the pores in your skin as well. That's called conscious whole body breathing. And it's a very simple, magical technique that all beginning initiates are taught, basically. Very simple. And you can use it in a number of ways, of course, as well. The quality could be courage instead of peace, or ease of transition, and so on. So try focusing more on your breathing in this time, because it's very powerful, and it will help to integrate a lot of the stuff that you're dealing with and help you get through it. And just remember I'm here for you, all right? Although there's other stuff is going on in the world and it's major, you're just as important to me, all right? So it's all a matter of relative scale, and that is that the operative word there is relative, not scale, all right? So it's all equally important to me because I see it all as being part of the same. So talk to me if you need to. Don't think that it's adding stuff, right? What it's adding stuff, if you need to talk to me at these times, what it's adding is details. It's adding more information. It's not adding more burden, all right? So I love you so much. Scorpio loves you so much. My tarot reading before I left for this trip, the death card twice. Yeah, Ten of Swords, all right, yeah, that's not so pleasant. And Strength, okay, yeah, that's clear, right? That's clear. It's not going to be easy, but you've got the power to get through it, the strength and the will to get through it, and it's a necessary transformation. All right, 1:40 a.m. Wow, okay, you better get some rest. I love you so much. And let the stars shine upon you and sleep with the angels, please.
So I listened to that message. I must have listened to it, 30 times. I just listened to it over and over and over again. And it kind of saved my life. And after doing the breathing practice that he recommended, I finally fell asleep. And it was about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, and I entered into this altered state as I slept. And the whole night, I felt David with me, and he was opening up all these channels in my body, and he was showing me how to let go. He was showing me how to go through this transition, this death. And I woke up, and everything that I had been resisting in my life, including the shitty food that I had been eating and not wanting to give up, including the coffee that I had been drinking that was making me horribly sick. And I knew it, and I kept doing it anyway, and I just was making myself suffer, including all of my small dreams and personal desires and desperate need for rescue was gone. It all was transformed. And I woke up and I drove to a grocery store. and I got tea, and I got fruit, and I hydrated myself, and I ate the best food that I could on my way home, and I drove home super fucking sick. And I finally made it home. I pushed through and made it home in one day, and I got in bed, and I stayed in bed for a week, sick with COVID. And after that, everything changed. I gave up my striving, my searching for rescue. I gave up looking for something external to save me. And a huge part of it was that I gave up the idea that I was a normal person and that I was going to have a normal life and that I was going to find a partner and have a house. And maybe even though I was, 42 years old, that I would have 2.5 kids and just do the normal human stuff. I just realized deeply that my path was not going to be the normal human path. And there was so much grief with that. And I felt so alone. But I had surrendered. I had sacrificed myself, sacrificed my small self for something that was greater, that I knew was greater on the other side. I didn't know what it was or what it would look like, but I trusted that it was there. And I've talked about this many times, I think, or maybe a few times on the podcast, that I've had so many times in life where I am approaching a threshold and it's kind of feeling like I'm going to level up. And this intense loneliness and fear overtakes me. And I'm just certain that no one will follow me across this threshold and I'll just be truly alone. And that has never been true. And also paradox, like there is some truth to that as well, because not everybody will follow. Not everybody is interested in going to these places. And my circle did get smaller after this because I changed. There was an enormous amount of grief around all of this. And that makes sense, right? Because this was, after all, the final death of the small self. And every little death and big death invites us into grief. And our bodies are actually made to grieve, just like they're made to laugh. And they're actually made to do it in community. And we used to know that. And we used to have cultures that would hold space for the grief that comes through for the little and big things. And it used to be all woven into life and held as both sacred and somehow not as big of a deal as it is today, since we've cast that into the underworld along with anything else that can't be rationally weighed and measured. And so we know it's been down there with our dark sister, growing stronger in the shadows, growing more terrifying and more difficult to approach. But I know now, and I knew then, that every time I was courageous enough to feel my feelings, and every time any of us are courageous enough to feel our feelings, to turn towards the thing, to surrender to the reality of the thing, that some of our own collective and personal shadows are freed up from the underworld. So that's it, guys. That's it. That's the final death of the small self. And I've had my moments of forgetting, and I've had my moments of suffering, of course. But something inside me was rewritten that night in the truck when I laid down my own life and preferences and grasping desires and let the lion sink his teeth into my neck for the good of the group. Now, what it looks like for me is that I'm constantly seeking for ways to let love move through me instead of desperately seeking to bring love to me. And I've taken bodhisattva vows and spend my days looking for ways to surrender more deeply into the ever alive bleeding edge of life herself, who is the one that I surrendered to, now that I think about it. And there are lots of things that arise each day that call for my care and attention, and I don't have to work so hard to try to find meaning and purpose. It just arrives. And it's such a fucking cliche, but there's so much true, deep, quiet joy in acts of service and love. And don't get me wrong, like I fuck up all the time and I suffer and struggle and I fail and I'm not as nice as I should be and I'm not as generous as I should be. And I'm still, just a completely regular human. But it's just not as much of a big deal anymore because we all fuck up and we all suffer and we all struggle. And I was getting to the end of this episode, the end of this telling, and that Pema Chodron quote came into my mind. So I'm going to read it here because it just so perfectly describes it. And she says spiritual awakening is frequently described as a journey to the top of the mountain. In the process of discovering bodhicitta, the awakened heart, their journey goes down, not up. It's as if the mountain pointed towards the center of the earth instead of reaching into the sky. Instead of transcending the suffering of all creatures, we move toward the turbulence and doubt. We explore the reality and unpredictability of insecurity and pain, and we try not to push it away. If it takes years, if it takes lifetimes, we let it be as it is. At our own pace, without speed or aggression, we move down and down and down. With us move millions of others, our companions in awakening from fear. And at the bottom, we discover water, the healing water of bodhicitta. Right down there in the thick of things, we discover the love that will not die. And that was what I discovered on the other side of this final death of the small self. That my conscious surrender and sacrifice brought me to that place. And it was hell. I went through hellscapes in that process. And I'm not saying that this is a prescriptive thing. I'm not pushing anyone towards this. I'm just planting a seed for those of you who are dancing on the threshold. That every time we let go, we practice dying. And every time we die and don't die, we do discover that we are caught and held. And we discover that there's an entirely new world, whole new universes on the other side of that event horizon. And also, maybe don't go through it alone, Reach out for help to a spiritual teacher or a coach or a therapist or a safe, wise friend. I didn't do it alone, and I don't think we're meant to do this alone. And also, paradox, I was alone. There's nobody who can go on the journey for me. But it's nice to have allies watching our back. So I'll leave you with some final questions that have been so very alive for me lately. And I kind of answered it earlier. I have an idea of what I surrendered to. But who was it that set me up on this synchronicity-filled, absurd road trip? And what was the agenda? And how do I balance my own agency with that agenda? The agenda that, I still feel playing out in my life with these beings that are interacting with me, this influence. And how do I walk the line between following guidance and living my regular human life? And these are the questions, my friends. This is what we're going to get into as we continue to explore this work together. Thank you so much to Morgan Jenks for our musical soundscapes, and thank you for those of you who have already signed up to be part of the Bridge Collective. It has officially launched. If you would like to apply to be part of this collective, please reach out to me. It's going to be cool, people. The other thing that I'll say really quickly is that Patreon is changing. I have set up some different benefits for the different tiers. And I've also created a new tier called the Bridge Collective, which is $15 a month. And it's for people who want to get in on the resonance and the ideas that are happening in that space, but don't want to join the community. And so if you join that, you'll have access to the benefits from the other 2 lower tiers, and also 2 exclusive podcasts a month where we talk about this work specifically. So that's it. I'm done talking to you about all the things. Thank you for listening. If you want to learn more about any of this, check the show notes or go to my website to reach out to me directly, which is honeyheart.me.